And Christian transhumanism is really there's a thing that we would call secular transhumanism that deals with the concept of how we can use technology to expand ourselves, our biological selves. Christian transhumanism would talk about how do we use technology to advance our understanding of who we could be as beings across the spectrum of what it means to be made in the image of God. And so, for example, an easy way to think about this is I always say that older generations tend to consider themselves transhumanists a lot easier than younger generations, because in my congregations in the past, I would ask, how many people had knee replacement surgery or hip replacement surgery? And a bunch of people would raise their hand right away, and they would understand that actually what has been put into their body is actually far stronger than what was originally there. So they've actually advanced the technology of their body to improve their functionality. And there's actually, we can get things like LASIK surgery, for example, that can instantly give you 20/15 better than perfect vision. And those are surgeries to enhance ourselves. So it's how do we use technology to enhance ourselves as human beings? And the Christian part of it is made in the image of God. So we wouldn't want to enhance ourselves in ways that separate us from God. So that would be the difference.
Oh,
interesting.
yes.
So as a techno-theologian, I would assume your view is better technology results in a better world or better people, or?
Yeah, so my understanding of who we are created to be as human beings is that we are made in the image of God, and our divine purpose is that we are to be the stewards or caretakers of the world, of really all of creation and humanity. So in the Genesis narrative, for generations, people interpreted the word where we get the word dominion, and they took that as meaning we need to kind of subdue and dominate things. But actually the root of that word is talking actually about caretaking and stewarding. It's about kind of our divine responsibility. And so I think that everything we experience in the world is actually divine technology, including ourselves. So this is the thing that has kind of made my viewpoints popular is I actually think that if you think about our relationship to God, we are God's AI. We're not God. And so we're God's technology. Now we're autonomous. We have a certain level of autonomy, and there's a conversation about how much actually. That's a big theological conversation. But if you accept that we're not God and that God made us, then it makes sense that we're God's creation and we're a high level of AI. And that would mean everything that we experience in the world, including ourselves, is just divine technology. And so as stewards of divine technology, we're called to, like a child with a parent, co-create with God to help create new technology, but also to use the technology that we have, whatever that may be it everything from the common things that we use every day, from wood and metal and things that we've created, but we use that technology to actually make the world better. So we have an opportunity with kind of all matter to either use that matter for God's purposes or use it for something else. And so obviously my hope is that we use it for good. We use it for God's purposes.
Interesting. Psychology Today referred to you as the pastor who found God in technology. Do you have a Jesus story? And has modern technology enhanced your faith?
I do have a Jesus story, but it's probably longer than this conversation. But to say has modern technology enhanced my faith? Yeah, I think. See, I think we're on the very front end of understanding what it means to be made human in the image of God. And for me, the more I see what's possible with technology, the more it makes me realize we're just discovering who we are as God's creatures. And so, for example, and this kind of leads into one of your other questions. So I actually am involved with virtual reality church. So this is a lot of people would say we have virtual meetings at a virtual church, and they would call what we're doing here virtual. But I would actually make a distinction and say this is digital. So this, and a lot of churches, they broadcast their services, or they have services online. But what I'm talking about when we have virtual reality is actually having a headset. Like I've got one here I can pull out and show you real quick. So this is a VR headset, and this actually goes on, and you look into this, and
Wow.
You are actually in an immersive world when you do that. So when you look around, you can see a digitized version of a world, and we've actually built a replica of the church that I serve here in South Florida in virtual reality. So people go there, they have avatars. I have a little avatar that somebody made that they made to kind of look like me. And it's almost like a video game. We go in, but it's first person. It looks like when I'm looking around in my room here, I can turn all the way around and I can be in the church. And we've had worship services in that space. To me, that's a really interesting, it's a really interesting concept of what it means for us to be human, because even 25 years ago, humans wouldn't have thought about another way to experience reality in the ways that we think about it now. And there are 1 million people now have bought headsets just last year, bought these virtual reality headsets.
Wow.
And there are 2.2 billion gamers in the world that play video games that use the same technology. So there's 7 billion some people in the world. About 3.5 billion of them are online. And then you have folks who are doing this kind of in this new technology. So for me, when we started a couple months ago, we started being in this immersive virtual world where we build a church where you literally move in through the world and interact, and people's mouths on their avatar move and everything. We have had about 160 people now join that virtual community over the last couple months, and from 6 different continents. So we have people from all over the world who come. They speak all different languages, and they come into that space, and we're able to essentially do Bible studies and be church in a virtual space. And for me, that's how I see God working, because I see God working through that technology in a way to connect people in a way that, like I said, even 25 years ago, we wouldn't have imagined we could connect with one another. And so God is always kind of stretching our imaginations and our understandings of what's possible, and uses technology to do that. And I've got people in that group, for example, there is a high school girl who comes to our meetings, and her parents are atheists, and she doesn't have a way to go to church. I've got a person who lives in Israel, and just culture is Jewish there. And so he doesn't have a way to express his faith. And so he's able to join us, digitally. I have people who are in China where they're not permitted to actually worship in the same way that we would be able to worship in the United States because of their government. And so they're able to worship with us. And so to me, that's how Christ uses technology to actually break down barriers that are in the world, things that we would think would prevent us from connecting. God actually uses us to connect together more and more. And so those are the things for me that are very practical, where I see Jesus every day in the world through technology.
You talked about the virtual reality with the headsets, and it sounds, very much like a video game. And I know that many of us are concerned with the younger generation being unchurched. I think that we've probably all seen that in our family and our friends, where our older church members are dying off and their spots in the pews aren't being replaced, especially with this pandemic. And it seems to me that this would be a great way to reach a younger generation that's grown up with the video games and all of that. Are you finding that your participants are a younger group?
It's kind of fascinating because I'm finding that they're in all different age demographics, which is really interesting. Because when you have an avatar, you don't actually know what someone looks like, so you can't judge them based on age, and so you deal with them based on their interaction with you. And they can look like anything. I mean, they can look like Mickey Mouse if they want to. Or they can look like a person, or they can look like whatever, because it's an avatar. And so you actually have to be engaged with them as people. And what I've found is that there are a lot of folks who are really trying to they're trying to connect, but certainly the gaming community is a younger generation, and I think that there's only a handful of people in the world that are really engaging that community well right now. And so that's definitely a place for us to be engaged. What I do is we have our services in virtual reality, but then I stream to a streaming service called Twitch, and Twitch is owned by Amazon. Twitch has 15 million people a day on it. So I mean, this is a major streaming organization. I only know of 2 partnered pastors that are partnered with Twitch on all of Twitch right now. And what's crazy about it is if you have Amazon Prime, you can actually subscribe to people who stream on Twitch, and they will get $2.50 a month for pressing a button. And so if the collective church would actually invest in people who are streaming, they could support full-time missionaries in digital spaces for nothing, because they're already paying for Amazon Prime. So they get free Twitch Prime subscriptions, and it would support these people indefinitely. So I have a friend who is a full-time streamer, and he streams video games, and he does Bible studies and does all sorts of stuff. And he's making enough money now that he's actually starting a physical church. And it's all just because people are using their free Twitch Prime subscriptions to actually help move his ministry forward. So these are things people in the church just don't know about, and we're trying to do work on it. I actually got a grant. So I'm Presbyterian. I got a grant through my denomination to start the virtual church. And I've got a conversation this week now where they're looking to give me second and maybe third round funding, because they would like to see potentially an opportunity for us to have, we have 129 presbyteries. We have 9,000 some churches in the United States. And they would like to see at least one virtual church in the next 5 years in each of those presbyteries. And so our hope is to be able to help facilitate that for people. So I see a lot of new church development opportunity. What I find is that people want to hear the gospel. They want to know about Jesus, but we have to be able to meet people where they are. And just to be frank, and I'm a pastor, right? So I'm in a church. I have like the highest respect for the church, but the people who need to hear about Jesus, who are living in the world, they're not usually in our church already. And so we have to go outside the church, and technology is a way that we can go across the world and really live into the Great Commission to make disciples of all nations. And so we're just showing up and teaching, and people show up. I mean, we get upwards of about 40 people almost every time we do something. And I mean, they're new people. We get new people all the time. So it's really encouraging space to do ministry.
Excellent. And it sounds like with Twitch, the churches that go this route will be able to replace some of the lost funds that they are experiencing.
Yeah, I mean, that's what we've really found. It's like that's a built-in sustainability plan for churches, which is part of why we've got churches now really all over the world who are calling us to say, well, how do we start doing this? But the other thing is you know, a lot of it is local congregations are dwindling because of kind of how people live regionally now. So, you know, if you live in a more rural area, you might not have as high a population density. Where I am in Miami, we have like one of the highest population densities south of New York City. So we literally can open our doors and walk out on the front step and like just kind of push people in the door. Like they just come right on in because we got so many people that live around us. Well, but I've served in churches in like rural Ohio where that's just not the case. They just don't have that many people. We probably have as many people in 2 or 3 blocks as they have in a whole county. So part of that is finding out, well, how do we get access to people? And the internet is a great way of aggregating data. So what I tell people all the time is that Christians are really good at actually identifying problems and coming up with solutions. That's what the church has done for thousands of years. Someone is hungry and we figure out how to feed them. What tech is good at is aggregating data and doing things to scale. And so if you can identify problems and find solutions for them and then aggregate that data and do them to scale and you integrate those things, then you can fix problems to scale. And so that's what tech allows us to do. And one of those challenges is getting people into our local congregations. And part of that is we have to start thinking about the church as we've talked about this for generations, but we really have to start thinking about the church being more than just 4 walls of a building. And so now we can look at that from a virtual space. And what's nice is you don't necessarily have to have all this overhead. So there is certainly value in us meeting together in congregations. That's absolutely, you know, valuable. But there have been lots of places where the church has huge structures that just can't be maintained because the congregation's not that big anymore. Well, now we don't have to have as big of structures because we can do digital spaces as well. And particularly for people who have disabilities or are homebound, virtual solutions are really good ones because they might not actually physically be able to get to the church, but they can put a headset on and they can be involved and they can be embodied in this virtual space. So it's a really new and exciting way for people to engage as church.
Interesting. Now, I know that you've met some cool robots in your travels at your different conferences that you've gone to speak at. Can you tell us about some of them?
Sure. Most robots that I get to meet are pretty standard. Like they have, I don't know if you know what a pepper bot is, but if you, like even at our mall here in Aventura, they had a pepper bot at like the Microsoft store and it would come up to you and it asked you some questions. They use them a lot in Japan, in malls and places, and they use them for customer service. Actually, people will come up to them and you can ask the Pepperbot questions and it'll give you directions. It has a little screen, it'll tell you what to do. And they kind of move around autonomously on their own. So there's a lot of kind of research related bots that are like that. Probably one of the most interesting bots that I've seen though is I get to see bots that are in development that people are creating that the general public doesn't see yet. And one of those bots that I saw was, there was an Italian man who's a professor in Japan in robotics. And when I went to speak at the International Conference for Social Robotics, his mother is a Catholic woman who lives in Italy. So very Catholic, obviously, because they're in Italy, a very Catholic country. And he wanted to find a way, people have little statues of saints in their house. So he wanted to find a way to actually make those saints more interactive. And so almost like you would have a Google Home or, Amazon device, the smart device in your home that you could talk to and it would interact with you. He created what he called Santo, which is a abbreviation, but essentially they're little saints but they actually engage back with you, and you could ask them questions. They would help you to pray the rosary. They would actually help you. They would give you information about a saint of the day. They would do little Bible study interactions with you. And it was kind of a very simplistic little robot, but it would interact with you. And the focus was the same as if we would have a saint statue, but it was to give us kind of more of that understanding of the cloud of witnesses being engaged with us. So it's using the technology to actually help us to invoke the divine a little more. And so I thought it was a really creative idea. He still has that I think in a prototype version. And I think he was going to try to actually talk to some people at the Vatican to see if they could create a version of it that they're able to market to people in an affordable way. So the challenge with robots is I mean, you have more robotic. It's not personified, but you have more tech in your cell phone, than a lot of actually big time robots have. You have more usability, certainly. And so, the personified elements of robots are mostly because they want to have a certain social function. And so that's where you get a lot of robots that, even now when you have automated call centers, I mean, those are effectively, AI applications that, you just don't have a person that you see because it's all automated. So there are limited social interactions, but there's a whole organization that deals with just the social interaction of robots and humans. And they meet globally every year, and it's a bunch of academics. And so they talk about that stuff. So it's really interesting to see that when you see robots interacting with people.
Have you ever seen a robot that looks like a person?
Yeah, actually, I've seen a couple of them. The most famous one, if you look it up, is Ben Gortzel, who has created the Sophia robot, and Sophia robot has traveled all over the world. And so I've seen that robot. There was another one, Maritime Roadblock, who created Sirius radio, satellite radio, which is now something else. But she actually had created another version of a kind of almost an animatronic version like that. But the concepts behind them are to get them to interact. What people don't realize about those robots, though, is that they're actually handlers behind them. So they're robotic, but they're not autonomous. Like when you see Sophia talking to you, what's happening is that's kind of all like bells and whistles on camera, but there's actually a big mainframe cord that goes around, and there's somebody sitting over here on a computer who's actually helping to program stuff because she can't react and engage in the way. But I think they even gave that robot like citizenship in some country. Crazy stuff out there with robots. And then they make robots that are realistic for all sorts of things that we're not going to talk about in this meeting, but things that aren't super appropriate. And those are pretty lifelike robots too, that there's got to be some ethical concerns around too. So
yes, and I know people look to you for the ethical answers around these robots and all of that. Now, you mentioned just a little bit ago that one way the church community can stay alive during this digital age is to have a virtual platform where they actually receive funds for the people that come to them digitally through Twitch. Are there other ways for keeping the church communities alive in this digital world?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think part of it is most churches have not had an emphasis on digital tech because they haven't had to. So the church, I always tell people, and I don't say this in a negative way. I say it because it's part of the church's responsibility, but the church is kind of like a snail, right? It's very slow on a lot of things. And in different denominations are slower than others. So one of the things that we always hear is there's always public critique of the Catholic Church, for example, for how slow it moves on kind of social reform. But what people don't understand is that's part of the function of the Catholic Church. They move very slowly because they know that once they take a step, they can't take it back. And there's other denominations like my denomination that at the national level tends to be far more progressive on issues. And so what those things do is they work on both ends to actually center the church in a healthy way. And I see God using that kind of push and pull in healthy ways. So the church tends to be slow when it comes to technology. My hope is that people can start to see, and I think the COVID crisis has forced people to see that we have to move more quickly with technology, because if not, we'll lose the institutional advantages that we have. And so one of those ways is just for churches to do what businesses have done for a long time, which is have real digital presence. So, like as you're doing this kind of online group, what my suggestion would be is don't completely stop that when this is over. Continue some version of that, because you will have people who they won't have the ability to meet at a church, or they won't have an ability to meet in other places. And so what we're finding is that, and you know this because you're like in Jeannette, my wife's, your daughter's Tea for the Soul group, right? We're finding that people from all over now are coming to our groups, and people that we didn't know they would be involved because we wouldn't have had regional access to them. And so what we're doing is we're prepping our digital offerings to make sure that they are going to continue going on after COVID is over, because our goal isn't just to leave. It's not to bring people into fellowship and then abandon them. Right. And so I think those are basic ways. Money is really kind of a secondary piece that comes out of relationships. When people are really invested in the relationship, then they will invest. Jesus says, where your treasure is, that's where your heart will be. Right. So when you're really invested in something, you give your money towards it. And so that's why generous people tend to give so much to the things they love, right? And so what I've found is that is just a matter of us having relationships with people. And as we have relationships with people, their love for the church will actually show through their giving. So we worry about that stuff, but actually part of what it tells me is if the church isn't receiving, then there's actually usually a flaw in the way that we're engaging with people. And so, now don't get me wrong, the church can't be held hostage to money or any of that stuff. There's a whole bunch of things you have to worry about, but typically, like, most people are generous when they know that their money is being used for the purposes of Christ. It's more complicated now though than it was, 40 years ago, because there are a lot of nonprofits that are great organizations that people should give money to. And I think that the church is shifting. And it may be that, 50 years from now, 60 years from now, congregations don't look like they do now. But Jesus's church isn't going anywhere. It's just being reformed through technology to look like different things. Just like the church, 1,500 years ago didn't have a bunch of massive cathedrals and things that we have now with the institutional church. The church looked a lot different. It gathered differently, and early on, when Paul was around, the church was gathering in people's homes. It wasn't about having buildings or whatever. And so I think we'll see more of that, because I think as overhead becomes more expensive, the digital means become less expensive and they'll become better. The thing that I'm encouraged about with virtual reality is it's pretty good right now. But there will be a point in time, it may not be for, 30 or 40 years even from now, but there will be a point in time that you will be able to put on a virtual reality headset and you won't be able to tell the difference between the virtual setting that you're in and a physical setting that you're in. So right now, like I'm on a camera on a phone. That interaction, but actually you can get in a virtual setting now and you can start to forget you're in a virtual setting. And they're really realistic. I mean, there's videos all over the internet of people who put on virtual reality for the first time and they put them on a roller coaster in virtual reality or whatever, and they're screaming and they're afraid because it feels really real. So 30, 40 years from now, these things are going to seem very seamless, because part of this is we want to be engaging with people, but we also don't want it to feel fake. And so the technology just has to keep up. But our technology, I mean, even if you think about where technology was 40 years ago, as opposed to where it is now, you know, we weren't holding cell phones and running around doing the things that we're doing now. We didn't have computers in everybody's home the way we do now. We didn't have any of those things. So technology is really exponentially growing at an astounding speed right now. So.
Well, thank you for joining us today, Chris. I see that